Good morning, everybody. Well, have we got a show for you today? We've had such a brilliant couple of days. Some highlights have been for me, definitely John Hegarty yesterday. The creator economy stage absolutely blew me away. I've seen how influencer has really professionalized itself over the last 3 years, which is great. The fact that there were so many clients here and so many female clients here, which really strengthens and warms my heart. But hey, today's a very big day for 2 reasons. One is that we have Sir Martin Sorrell joining me on stage, but the other is that we're going to really talk about what's going on in the world. And with the election here today in the United Kingdom, an imminent change happening in the United States, we have an election in France, and let's not forget what's going on in India. Please put your hands together and join me in welcoming Sir Martin Sorrell to the stage.
I'm just looking at your book. There's a lot of notes there, Mary. There's a lot of preparation gone in. It's worrying me enormously.
You know, the thing about you, Sir Martin, is never go and try and pitch you for anything and be unprepared.
Research is really important, isn't it? Yep. Okay.
But, you know, Independence Day, we were just discussing it. There's been quite a lot of activity this morning regarding what's going on in the US. Do you want to kick off there and come back to the United Kingdom?
I think Biden's gone.
You think Biden's gone?
Yeah, I think, I mean, listening, it was a very interesting piece on Radio 4 this morning, interviewing a woman who must have stayed up all night, a Biden Finance Committee leader. And it was really interesting what she said. She said that the funds that are in the Biden campaign are committed contractually to Biden-Harris. And there's $200 million sitting there for the funding for the campaign. And as we all know, for good reasons or bad, funding is absolutely critically important. And she said that can't be committed to, technically, she didn't go into the reasons why, campaign rules, can't be committed to any other candidate. So the alternative to Biden is Kamala Harris, who currently doesn't poll as well as even as the interviewer said as Joe Biden. But in her view, Kamala has tremendous traction with Democrat supporters, financial supporters, and electoral supporters. But I do think the runes are saying that Biden, I think over the July 4th weekend, I would be willing to place a bet that he will maybe next week after the July 4th weekend decide enough is enough. I don't think they want a split convention. We were talking a little bit about this. Niall Ferguson wrote an article, again overnight, where he said, who is America's Gorbachev? Comparing the pre-Gorbachev regime in Russia to America, which at one level is a little bit strange, but another level is quite accurate. And then he referred to the fact you used to have split conventions in America. You used to go to the convention. The Democratic convention this year would be at the end of August. And then you would have a split convention and the candidate would emerge. This time, of course, you had the Biden-Harris ticket. So my view is that he will be replaced. The debate performance, you know, people say, well, it was a bad night, and Obama says, well, I had a bad night. But when you look at the Obama performance, that was an intellectual issue. This is a health, age, fitness issue. And the interesting thing is that since that happened, Biden hasn't come out without the use of a teleprompter in any session. So I would say it's good night, Biden, and it would be Kamala Harris probably that would be the candidate. The alternative, Newsom, Whitmer, Mayor Pete, who our agency did his media campaign last time, and our people loved him, absolutely loved him. But I don't think, if you look at the polling currently, I don't think they're a better alternative. Now, who wins in November? Maybe Kamala Harris is a different kettle of fish to Biden. But Trump, 9 points ahead of Biden post-debate in one of the latest poll. New York Times writing editorials, Biden should go. So we'll have to see how it plays out. The interesting thing about the interview was that she said the flashpoint was you can't have Trump re-elected. Another 4 years of Trump would be disastrous for America, not just over the 4 years, not for just the rest of this century, but centuries to come. And so this is going to be a really vitriolic campaign, whether it's Biden or Kamala Harris or whoever.
We discussed this previously. I mean, Trump is seen by American business as good for them.
Yeah, not openly. People don't. I mean, it's interesting. Bill Aikman, I think, after the debate, was reported as potentially switching his support from Biden to Trump. Steve Schwarzman has come out in favor of Trump. These are all powerful hedge fund, private equity, Ken Griffin, the Citadel. These enormously powerful financial supporters. I mean, on the point, on the practical point, what is the point for this audience? I mean, running a business, a global business, or a mini global in our case, is extremely difficult in these circumstances. I mean, you have immense volatility. I was in Paris yesterday, and you have France locked in an election. From a personal point of view, I would hate to see Marie Le Pen's party, the Route Nationale, in power. It looks like, on the basis of the polls, there will be a sort of deadlock there, and you'll have Macron, but the biggest party will be the RN, which is a sad state of affairs, I think, again, I say subjectively. But, you've got tremendous volatility, and I was talking to clients in Paris yesterday, major French companies, and, there's immense concern about it, and the French stock market initially fell on it. Now it looks as if there might be a coalition with no clear majority for the RN. Markets have recovered a bit, but it's a stasis, and we're already starting to see in France delays on projects, and uncertainty is the enemy. So in America, what do? I think American business, as you said, Mary, although publicly they don't often come out and say it, they like Trump, in their cups after several drinks.
Yep.
They will admit to being concerned about regulation. That's the biggest issue. Everybody talks about geopolitical uncertainty, AI, climate change, and everything. But the biggest issue when you poll them is regulation. And regulation and tax. And Trump, low reg, low tax. The first time he went back to the Capitol building from January the 6th, what did he do? He promised lower corporation tax 21 to 20 and implied lower regulation. And what did Biden do in response? Almost immediately respond to that. So from a business point of view, a Trump presidency, if that was to happen, which the odds are that it will at this point in time, we'll see what happens, how it spins out between now and November. For North America, I don't think it's bad from a business point of view. From a global point of view, it's pretty precarious, and it's pretty volatile, and I would say deeply concerning, because we are going to see extreme volatility. The Ukrainians, I was at a session earlier this week with the FII, PIF, and Aramco. And what was really interesting was the woman that was interviewing, doing what you're doing here on the panel, had just been in Ukraine for a week, journalist, and she said that the Ukrainians are terrified about a Trump presidency.
And understandably so.
Yeah.
Understandably so.
So that's one thing. I mean, here, UK, look, we're all going to be here. I was just looking at the stats for a minute. We all congratulate ourselves in the UK for being the world's 6th largest economy, after India now. India is ahead of us in terms of GDP. But if you look at the GDP per capita stat, we're 26th, 27th in the world. And I'm not suggesting the UK is a rounding error. It isn't. It still punches, I think, in many respects above its weight. Life will continue under Labour. I don't think they'll get quite, famous last words, but I don't think they're going to get quite the big majority that people are talking about. We'll see how it pans out, but they will have a very significant majority. And they will be in power, I think, for at least 2 terms.
So do you think there is hope for a stronger, leaner, more successful Britain? And if so, you know, how should we shape it from our industry perspective? Because we've been through and are going through a very uncertain time. Clients are spending less. You know, the consumer is obviously disillusioned and pessimistic. Keir Starmer coming in.
It is a $3 trillion economy, and France, Germany, Italy, Spain, the other 4 big European economies, I'm still loading UK into Europe, are all around that level or slightly below that level. Germany is above it, France is below it, and Spain and Italy are below it. So it's big. But I have to tell you that every client I speak to, without exception, I think I can say that, looks at Europe from a cost point of view.
Yeah.
So practically, you know, what can we as an industry do? Well, again, this may sound a little disloyal to say it, but I have to say it. I think for growth purposes, you look to other markets. You know, certainly as we look at things at S4 and our operating brand Media Monks, we look at North and South America, which that block is going to become even more important than it is now. I mean, just when you have supply chain difficulties in your Tesla and Apple in China, you have supply chain difficulties there. You look at India or other Asian countries. But what do? You also look at Mexico. And you know, the idea of getting expensive manufacturing back into America, labor-intensive manufacturing to America, or indeed even in the UK, is a pipe dream. And the hub structures that we're seeing in our industry and that clients demand, whether it's procurement departments or marketing departments, are going to become even more important. So that North-South America time zone, because from a time zone point of view, it's very effective, is going to become more and more important. Africa, to my mind, is too volatile. Corruption is a number 1 issue in most African markets. And, you know, I have a subjective problem about South Africa, which probably was one of the most vibrant opportunities. But putting that subjectivism to one side for a minute, it's still too volatile if you see what's happening in South Africa, Nigeria. We have more wars going on in the continent of Africa than we've ever had before. Too much volatility. Middle East, despite the war, despite Iran, and maybe because of Iran, and because of the Saudi commitment, which is still there to do a deal with Israel, maybe not with Netanyahu there, but I think that's the only good news that I can see in that region, and indeed probably beyond that region at the moment. The Middle East, I think, offers a lot of promise from a growth point of view. And then Asia, pretty much across the board, from Japan to Australia and New Zealand, but particularly the countries in between, what I call New Asia. So not just China. If you're big in China, do you really want to be bigger? If you're Unilever at 9% of your sales, or Reckitt's at 7%, I think it is, you do want to be bigger. And the right figure for China is probably something in the region of 10, 15, 20%, where Tesla and Apple are. So that's where you want to get to. So if you're not big enough in China, you still want to be bigger. But if you're big, where do you look? You look for India, obviously, big beneficiary. We've had an election there, and Modi, whatever you think about Modi, he is charismatic. He understands branding. One of the few, I think, presidents, prime ministers that really gets it. And he has created a strong force there. Obviously, there are big inequality issues which showed up in this last election. And maybe his policies will moderate as a result, but it's India, it's Indonesia, it's Thailand, it's the Philippines, it's Singapore, it's Malaysia. So those markets. And then come back to Europe. As I say, our clients look at it from a cost point of view. So what are the lessons for us? One is pick your geographies. I don't know how many people in this audience are involved in businesses that are not just purely UK but outside, but I think inevitably we will be forced under this, even if the Conservatives were returned, I think the same thing would be true. We are forced to look at the UK as the base of what we do on a global basis. So for exports, it's very good news because we have to develop our business geographically following that footprint that I laid out. And the second thing is in a European context, what is going to become really, really important, and particularly in this market, is the rise of the new technologies, principally AI, but not forgetting things like the metaverse. The metaverse has been much maligned. If we were at MadFest last year, people would say it's been overhyped, and probably it was. But having just gone through a cancer bout myself, I've seen firsthand what is happening in terms of the use of the metaverse and meta techniques in healthcare and other areas like training, sports, entertainment, music, work from home, work from anywhere. It's quite extraordinary. So it's the metaverse, it's AI, and we can get into that if you want. And last but not least, things like quantum computing and blockchain. These technologies are going to be crucially important to developing our business here. Just turning to the government for just 1 second. I don't think the new Labour government tomorrow morning will have much room to maneuver. If you look at their manifesto, they're actually projecting lower levels of public investment, not as low as the Tories would have produced under their manifesto, but they're projecting lower levels of public investment than before. Private investment is poor. We probably, in a European context, is probably 26th or 27th in terms of productivity from investment over the last several years. So the private sector and the public sector, from an investment point of view, have been too low. How does the government stimulate that? Well, they're not going to have much in the way of deficit spending to do, unless they raise taxes. So I think whatever they say, I think what they will be forced to, they can play some games with the government balance sheet. They can redefine technically how they think about assets and how they think about liabilities and come up with a bigger potential leverage figure. But putting that aside, and maybe Rachel Reeves will do that to give her a little bit more wiggle room in terms of government spending. But if they don't do that, they're going to have to raise taxes in the short term in order to get done what they're promising in terms of government services, NHS and everything else. So I think in the short term, minimum wage they're going to raise. The employment, Angela Rayner's employment, new employment laws, and I was in Paris yesterday, will move us more towards the French model. And that's going to make flexibility in our business much more difficult. And make people much more cautious about taking people on.
So Martin,
anyway, that's where I come out. So I think in the short term, it's going to be a little bit difficult for them. I said they've got a 10-year run. I think they'll be in for at least 2 terms. So they have, I think, if their majority is significant, which it looks as though it will be, I don't think it'll be as great as people are projecting, but we'll see. It'll be big. And that will give them the ground to take a 10-year view rather than a 5-year. But I think it's going to be pretty tough in the early years.
So you mentioned there Rachel Reeves, Angela Rayner, we skirted around, Le Pen, and obviously Keir Starmer, et al., Trump, Biden, what have you. you have been a friend of both great business people, in global business leaders, and great statespeople.
Wish I was, but anyway.
Well, I think you have been, and in the 38 years that I've been working around you. So presidents, prime ministers, leaders, have you noticed anything about the change in character that you've met amongst these movers and shakers, these leaders, these people who are essentially defining the future of our world?
I've not met all of them, so that's inaccurate, but I've met a few of them. There aren't the person. Well, somebody said to me that this is survivor bias. You look back and you say things were different and people were different. I would take Tony Blair in a heartbeat. Okay. If he stood again, which I guess technically he could have done, but he didn't. Maybe the issues around the war that and his relationship with Bush would preclude that. But I'd take him in a heartbeat. Now, it's interesting. He may actually turn out to be the most powerful man in Britain, because if you think about it for a minute, Starmer and Rachel Reeves' playbook was the Blair-Brown playbook. Yep. The smoked salmon breakfasts and Davos, going to Davos, wining and dining and meeting business and playing business. But I spoke to somebody inside the Labour machine, and he said to me, somebody was in the advertising business as well, he said to me that the difference between Starmer and Reeves and Blair and Brown is that when Blair came in, he actually said there were 304 pieces of legislation that they were prepared to implement. That's what he told me. And he said they implemented 296 of them. He said this lot, referring to Starmer and Reeves, don't have that plan. Interestingly, yesterday, Starmer made a speech in which he said, we have detailed plans. Starting to hear things about housing, yep, minimum wage, labor laws, etc. So maybe those comments are doing them a disservice. But Blair had a charisma. There is no Kissinger. Whatever you think about Mrs. Thatcher or Ronald Reagan, there are no people. Now, maybe we don't want those people. Maybe Rishi Sunak and Keir Starmer are more the type of leaders, given all the, what's happened during the Tory 14 years in terms of however many prime ministers we've had. It is just, I think it was 5, whatever it is catastrophic and culminating in Liz Truss and the quasi-Kwarteng budget. So maybe we don't want as much of that. But I do think the leadership thing, we have in America 2 people currently going off against one another who you would raise questions and marks about. You have 2 leaders here which are very different in terms of style. Yep. And I think, if you look at Europe, it is amazing to me that Meloni, yep, is now tagged as, maybe it was because she was hosting the G7, but she's now tagged as the leader of Europe. So it is there's very little charisma around. That's why I think Modi is so interesting, is he does have it. Zelensky clearly has it, but in an extremely difficult position, but there are very few other leaders that do.
Well, apart from the charisma of Tony Blair and the undoubted optimism that he brought to the country when he won, and it was really, that was the time when WP was, expanding at a rate of knots and globally becoming the dominant number 1 force. What we also had was, in Britain, we had a brand. We had Cool Britannia. And we had culture and, music and art and film very much at the forefront of...
Well, it's a really interesting point, because at that time, there was that, well, there still is that Great Britain campaign, which I still think is the best example of nation branding that we've seen. But it was very interesting. Cameron had that in Downing Street. When Theresa May took over, she moved it out of Downing Street immediately. Cameron, PR background, used to work for Michael Green. People forget that he was, for 9 years, he was lighting Michael Green's cigar at lunches. Anybody could last 9 years lighting Michael Green's cigar. It tells you something. But he understood branding and the importance of it. and he was a PR guy.
Yep.
Theresa May just didn't get it. And subsequently, nobody has got it. Blair understood it. Tony Blair understood it.
Yes.
So I think it is true. I think we need, I veer towards those type of people rather than what we've got currently, but maybe it's wrong for the times. Maybe you need a different, and maybe, Keir Starmer will grow into it. I think he was very unfairly tagged for this 6 p.m. on a Friday night thing. I think the reason he was doing that was his wife is Jewish, and he had a tradition, which is a great tradition.
But I think
and the Mormons do it too. Friday night with the family. It's a nice thing, very nice thing to do. I don't think he was suggesting that he would be non-compos mentis or not available, if anything was going on. And I don't think he said he would take the Sabbath off or Shabbos off on Saturday as well. So I think he was just making the observation that family life and the pressures that are all put on his family are extremely, extremely important. But you're right. I mean, we do have different types of leaders, but maybe this is an era where those different types work. We're about to find out in any event.
So what have you learned about keeping positive and optimistic when we're facing,
Well, I think
uncertainty?
I think the world is a really dangerous place. We have three massive problems at the moment: U.S., China, Russia, Ukraine, and it's not just Ukraine. I mean, what Putin's ambitions are, we don't know. And even if there was a settlement in relation to Ukraine acceptable to Zelensky and the Ukrainian people, and to Russia, what would be next? And then the third big issue is Iran. I think the so-called axis of evil, Russia, which the right wing in particular tag, but I think it is, is right to draw attention around Russia, around China, around North Korea, and around Iran, must be, I think Niall Ferguson said, they must be passing the popcorn around or watching it happen. It must be music to their ears to hear and see what is going on politically in the Western world. And this is really important, I think, to understand for our industry too. I was in Brazil recently, in Rio, and I heard a speech from Lula, President Lula. And, he made the point that the global south, as they call it, and the global south includes Russia in their definition, which doesn't make any sense, but it does include Russia. The global south resents the hegemony of what they call the global north, let's call it the West, the dominance that the US and indeed Europe, Western Europe, have had. They resent it and they want to overturn it. And it's important to understand that the E7, that's the 7 largest emerging nations, so-called, they've emerged in my view, but including China, are bigger in GDP than the G7. And if you remove China from the E7 and the US from the G7, the E6, the remaining E6, are larger than the G6. That tells you that the balance in the world is shifting. And if anybody in this room was running India or Brazil or Saudi Arabia or wherever, you would play both ends off against the middle. So the world is sort of rebalancing. And, I'm probably the oldest person in this room. And for 40 years, we've had a pretty golden era, low interest rate, well, good global growth, low inflation, low interest rates. The world is going to grow slower. Inflation is going to be higher and interest rates are going to be higher, which means that we as an industry have to be much more agile and much more flexible. Our clients and ourselves are going to have to be that. Our clients, in my view, are going to have to take back control, given what's happening with AI and first-party data, deprecation of third-party cookies, IDFA changes. Our clients are going to have to control more of what they do. So, we recently were appointed foundational agency for General Motors in the US a couple of weeks ago, which for us is big stuff. And what's interesting about that, if you look at it, is here's a client, the 11th largest advertiser in the US, really starting to do more internally than it's done before. It's splitting also the marketing task into two levels, sort of upper funnel, strategic creative, and the foundational agency, which implements, in this case, four brands work, principally in the US, but globally too. It's a very different model, and much more flexible, much more reliant on first-party data, much more reliant on the signals of the platforms. And so the three things, it sort of points out, you have to be agile, you have to take back control. Clients have surrendered. You may find it strange coming from me, being an agency person, but clients have surrendered too much. After 2008, they surrendered too much. The drive for internal efficiency, zero-based budgeting and everything, meant they shifted stuff out to the agency, which in a world where digital is 70% of the market, we'll cross the optimism, coming back to your question, is that the industry will cross $1 trillion this year. We are part of $1 trillion industry, media industry, advertising revenues. Of that trillion, 700 billion will be digital. Of that 700 billion, Google will be 250, Meta will be 150, so that's 400 billion, and Amazon will be 60. So 460 out of the 700 is in those three Western platforms. I'm excluding China, Alibaba, Tencent, and TikTok or ByteDance, obviously important in their context. ByteDance this year should be about 35 billion outside China. Last year, including 20 billion outside China, they were about 120 billion. So China was about 100 billion for them. So those are the dynamics. So that's where the opportunity lies for us. But in a world where clients have to be, again, to repeat it, much more flexible, much more agile, take back control more, our models at S4 and MediaMonks are around three areas. The classic outsource model, the embedded model, where we put our people into the clients, not on their payroll, on our payroll, and then the in-house model. And again, it might sound strange coming from me, but in-housing, it's not for everybody, and it's not in every case, but it is going to become, whether you like it or not, more and more important. Because in a world where increasingly data is driving not just AI, but the way we think about personalization at scale. One client I spoke to just recently has 80 million consumers on their database in the financial services. They have a highly personalized engine. They have a travel company. They know you're booking a ticket to New York. They'll serve you an ad or information around restaurants, hotels, events in New York, etc. So that world, in the world I'm describing, a more volatile world and a Europe where efficiency is going to become more important, that model is going to become critically important. We're being told to get off.
Apparently they want to stay here talking all day. And on that,
So I think the personalized model at scale may not to be everybody's taste. We were doing a presentation yesterday, and the client said, "What about quality?" But I think we have to start thinking about really different models. It's not, there's no use looking back with rose-tinted spectacles at the past, whether it's Mad Men and Don Draper, or whatever, or TV commercials, 60-second TV commercials at great expense. The world has changed.
so you've got a business that is populated by a lot of Gen Z and the young millennials. What do you think they're going to be doing in 5 years' time? Because the world that we're seeing here, certainly emerging in the agency world, and obviously, as you rightly point out, more and more clients taking back control, strategic planning actually being placed in the client's hands, not in the agency's hands. We're not.
Well, it'll be a
away,
partnership,
we,
but the balance in the partnership. Sorry, Mary. The balance in the partnership is going to be different. The balance is going to be more and more client orientated, because the guts of the business, the data. There was going to be a Y2K moment when Google deprecated third-party cookies a couple of years ago and then postponed it. And they announced that we're going to do it by the end of this year. December 31st this year, if they had gone through with it, was going to be a Y2K moment. There were going to be clients that were going to be caught out by not having pooled first-party data. Because when you deprecate third-party cookies, it drives you back to two sources. Your own data, which is, by the way, consumer consented, so you got over the privacy hurdle. Brand safety issues also dealt with in part, and the signals from the platform. So I call it the Netflix model on steroids. That model, like it or not, is going to become, in my view, and you've got really interesting things happening. So you've got GM doing what they're doing, and you've got Coke doing what it did a couple of years ago. Coke consolidating 75% of its business, its advertising spending in one holding company. And you've got GM going 4 independent agencies on sort of strategic work and a foundational agency, ourselves in that case. Different model. I think that model, which is highly personalized, driven by AI, come back to Mary's question about employment. And the answer on employment, again, I don't want to be negative about it, but I think we have to face up to the fact that we probably will see a net reduction in employment in a couple of areas. Visualization and copywriting, we are already seeing being heavily impacted by AI. To produce an ad used to take a week, a month, or whatever. It now literally takes hours. And we sell hours, and that's wrong. We have to sell outputs. And actually, we are doing that. Now, going into the gory detail, we have found procurement departments that are willing to look at reward systems or remuneration systems that are not time-based, but are output-based. But that area of visualization and copywriting is, in my view, going to be compacted. The hyper-personalization, the Netflix on steroids, as I call it, super opportunity. Price per asset is going to come down because we can produce it more quickly, but the total that we use is going to increase to such a degree that the total revenues we generate will increase. So huge opportunity. Media planning and buying. I've said you won't rely as a client on a 25-year-old media planner or buyer anymore. You're going to rely on an algorithm. One of my colleagues said the media planners and buyers they'll be like travel agents, the networks. I think that's probably harsh, but it's directionally so. So you're not going to need 10 or 15,000 people in a media planning and buying network anymore. You're going to need a smaller number of people. So that category 3, also I think you'll see net reduction. But the people will have much smarter outputs. And the people who are left running those networks will have super intelligent information. And at the same time, and this is controversial, but I'll say it again, the platforms are going to get closer to the clients. That doesn't mean that we're going to be squeezed out. It means that we're going to have to develop a closer and closer relationship between the platforms and the clients. The difference between now and 15 or 10 years ago is that the platforms would have had to replace us or provide more services with people. And they're not people-intensive businesses, they're capital-intensive businesses. Now they don't have to do that. With AI, it can be done algorithmically. So that third area, again, impactful in terms of employment. The fourth area, which is general efficiency, and I'll give you an example. We work with NVIDIA, AWS, and Adobe on outside broadcasting. If you do an outside broadcast, you could outside broadcast this, you'd need a truck. That will cost you about $10 million, $9 million. You amortize it over 5 years, $2 million a year. We can provide, with those 3 partners, a cloud-based solution using AI for $100,000, $200,000. So you have about an 80 or 90% cost reduction for linear broadcasters who are under huge pressure to reduce costs. A good example of cost reduction. That, I think, will be opportunities for employment and some negatives. And the final area, which I think is the most exciting, is the sharing of knowledge through AI. This, I think, is the most powerful. So we have 900 people working on Alphabet. If we can get every one of those 900 people to know what the other 899 know, we have a super, super force of people. You know, I was with a client yesterday in Paris. If I write a note on an LLM, or the LLM absorbs it, the data, and it's spun out immediately to the people that work on that particular client. So that area, huge opportunity. So the answer to your question, I would come out net negative, but there are pockets here around hyper-personalization, around efficiency, and around using LLMs, to put it simply, to educate everybody inside the company. These are super opportunities. Just NVIDIA, Jason Wang apparently has 51 direct reports. He went to McKinsey and said, how many people should have in an executive span? It would be 12. So how does he do it with 51? It means everybody knows what's going on. And he apparently gives each of his direct reports 5 objectives, and he has very few one-on-one meetings, and just does progress chasing on the 5 objectives. So what I'm saying is, AI will mean that the models that we have and clients have are going to be flatter, more democratic, less siloed, and I think more efficient and more effective.
I hate to stop you,
Sorry.
Sir Martin, but you've been wonderful. You've all had an absolute masterclass, and I want to thank you.
In my own mind, I'd agree, but I'm not sure about anybody else's. Yeah.
And thank you for answering my questions. And also, everyone, please put your hands together and thanks so much.
Thanks very much. Thank you.